Have you ever wondered why the US dollar, the absolute cornerstone of global finance, could be facing, well, a bit of a rejection problem? It seems like a paradox, right?
It really does.
Right.
Because it is central, yet we're seeing clear signs that countries are becoming hesitant, maybe even unable to use it for basic financing, like sovereign borrowing.
That's what we're getting into today. We've got some really interesting data that shows this shift isn't just talk. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and support Geo9.
Yeah, absolutely. What we're analyzing is this convergence. You've got U.S. trade policy, this huge internal debt picture, and geopolitical shift all pushing in the same direction. And it's changing who borrows what currency.
So for you listening, we're framing this around two big pressures. There's the external stuff, think trade wars, BRICS moving away from the dollar, and then this immense internal pressure from U.S. fiscal policy itself.
Let's start with the external side. The dollar's performance hasn't exactly inspired confidence lately.
No kidding, it's lost nearly 10% of its value just this year to date. That kind of instability gets noticed.
It absolutely translates into market action. We've seen total dollar bond issuance by sovereigns outside the U.S. drop by a pretty staggering 19% in just the first 5 months of 2025.
Wow, 19%.
Yeah, down to only about $86 billion. And importantly, that's the first decline like that in 3 years. So something's changing.
Is it fair to say this is mostly developing economies, or is it broader?
Well, the data suggests that while maybe G7 countries stick with the dollar, perhaps out of habit or deeper ties, emerging markets, especially countries aligned with BRICS, they're actively looking elsewhere. They're not waiting around.
Okay, but let me push back a bit. Couldn't this just be a temporary reaction to high U.S. interest rates? Makes borrowing dollars expensive, right? Is it really a fundamental rejection?
That's a fair question. High rates are definitely part of the equation, no doubt. But the key thing now is that viable alternatives exist and are accessible.
And the main alternative catching this flow is?
The Chinese yuan, the RMB, specifically through offshore bonds, what they call dim sum bonds.
Right, dim sum bonds, like Indonesia, for example. They just did their first one, didn't they?
Exactly. Indonesia issued its first ever offshore sovereign bond in RMB. It's a significant move.
So what's the core motivation there? Is it just about diversifying risk, or is it more about fearing the dollar could be, weaponized down the line?
Honestly, I think the immediate driver is more operational, almost a necessity. It comes down to trade flows and managing risk.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you issue debt in dollars, you absolutely need a reliable stream of dollar income, usually from exports, to pay it back, right?
Sure.
But current U.S. trade policy, particularly tariffs, is actively disrupting that income stream for many countries. It creates a dollar liquidity problem.
Ah, the tariff trap idea. Explain that a bit more.
Okay, so tariffs are often framed as punishing countries with trade surpluses against the U.S. But the side effect is they directly reduce the dollars flowing into that country from their exports to the U.S.
So less dollar income.
Precisely, which makes it much harder for them to service any dollar-denominated debt they might have already taken on. Let's use Indonesia again. It's a perfect illustration.
Okay, lay it out.
So Indonesia traditionally runs a big trade surplus with the U.S., meaning more dollars coming in than going out from that trade. About $24 billion exported versus $10 billion imported,
Yeah.
a $14 billion surplus.
Right.
But now they get hit with a new 19% tariff on their goods going to the U.S. So boom, their dollar revenue stream shrinks immediately.
Okay, income squeezed.
But wait, there's more. At the same time, as part of recent agreements, Indonesia is dropping almost all its barriers, like 99%, to U.S. goods coming in. And they're making huge purchase commitments in dollars.
Like what?
We're talking $20 billion for U.S. energy and farm products, another $3.2 billion for planes. So you've got dollars gushing out for these purchases while the inflow from their own exports is being choked off by tariffs.
That sounds dangerous, like double jeopardy, as you called it.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
If you're Indonesia in this situation and you've issued sovereign debt in dollars, you're incredibly vulnerable. If there's any kind of crisis, maybe a global slowdown, and your dollar revenues shrink even more.
You can't pay your dollar debts. You face a liquidity squeeze.
Exactly. You risk a devastating local currency crisis. Or you end up needing an IMF bailout, kind of like Argentina went through. So for these countries, moving away from dollar borrowing isn't just a strategic choice anymore. It's becoming critical for self-preservation.
Okay, so the external pressures are pushing countries away, and the RMB is stepping in. Are the numbers showing that RMB growth?
Oh, yeah. Those dim sum notes, the offshore RMB bonds, they hit about 720 billion yuan last year. That's roughly $102 billion US.
And that's up from the year before.
Yep. up 8%. And the issuance really started spiking, interestingly, right after the U.S. started hiking interest rates back in 2022. The timing is suggestive.
There's a real irony here, isn't there? A trade war aimed partly at China seems to be helping the RMB's international role.
It's a huge paradox. While the U.S. might be trying to decouple or reduce reliance on China, China's exports to the rest of the world, Asia, Africa, Europe, Latin America, are still growing strong. I think EVs up 11%, semiconductors up 30% globally.
Which means those buyers around the world need RMB to pay for those goods.
Exactly. The demand for RMB is growing organically through these trade flows, even if U.S.-China trade itself gets more complicated.
So the U.S. tariffs don't stop the global trade. They just inadvertently encourage settling it in a different currency.
That's a big part of it. What this really means is, look, global buyers are hunting for affordable inputs, right? Chinese goods, even with some tariffs factored in, often remain competitive globally.
So China can increasingly say, you want our stuff, pay us in RMB.
Or euros sometimes, but yeah, increasingly RMB. It just becomes practical. Why borrow in dollars if most of your trade is happening in RMB or other currencies anyway? Borrow in the currency you actually use.
And we're seeing this shift not just at the sovereign level, but with companies too.
Absolutely. Chinese banks reported selling almost $52 billion worth of foreign exchange, mostly dollars presumably, in September alone. Why? Because their clients, exporters, importers, are moving their money back into RMB. They prefer holding and transacting in their home currency now.
That signals a real shift in preference.
And it gives China leverage, especially with, say, Europe. Think about major European companies, L'Oreal, Mercedes, Volkswagen. They have massive exposure to the Chinese market, sometimes 20, 30, even 40% of their global sales.
Wow, that's significant dependency.
It is. And it allows Chinese importers dealing with them to start demanding payment settlement in RMB. The longer this whole trade environment persists, the more embedded the RMB becomes in global transactions.
If you're finding these insights useful, take a second to subscribe to Geo9. It really motivates us to keep sharing more research stories like this.
Definitely. So we've covered the external pressures pushing countries away from the dollar, but the story gets even more compelling when you look at the internal U.S. picture.
All right, the domestic financial situation, what you've termed the debasement crisis. It's stark. We should acknowledge the tariffs are bringing in some money. Customs duties are way up, like 153%, collected almost $120 billion.
True. That $120 billion sounds like a lot in isolation. But the striking thing is how completely insignificant it is next to the overall spending.
Because the deficit projection is still massive.
Exactly. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, they're still projecting a $1.8 trillion deficit for 2025. That's basically identical to last year, despite the tariff revenue bump.
So where's the money going?
Pretty much everywhere. Increased spending on Social Security, defense, Medicare, and the real killer, interest on the national debt.
That interest cost number is just staggering. How do we even describe a situation where the deficit itself seems to dictate monetary policy?
Well, that's the definition of fiscal dominance. It's like an unstoppable train. The interest expense alone has hit an unbelievable $1.2 trillion.
1.2 trillion, just interest.
Just interest. Think about that. I mean, 23 cents out of every single dollar the government takes in goes just to paying interest on past borrowing. That's the highest level in 25 years.
That's more than the entire GDP of some pretty large countries.
It's roughly the entire GDP of Mexico.
Yeah.
Spent just on interest payments.
Yeah.
That's the kind of number that should make everyone pause. It's simply not sustainable.
It feels like it forces the U.S. into a corner with only bad options.
That's correct. Basically, you have two paths forward, neither's appealing. Path one, let those interest costs keep rising until they essentially suffocate the economy. That likely ends in some kind of implosion.
Okay, not great. Path two.
Path two, use inflation to dilute the real value of the debt. Make the debt worth less over time by making the currency worth less. Given the political realities, you can't really slash spending dramatically, especially during economic competition or conflict.
Path two, currency dilution or debasement, becomes almost the only viable escape route.
It seems to be the path of least resistance, politically speaking. And the financial markets are already reflecting this expectation.
How so? What are the immediate maneuvers we're seeing?
Well, the pressure on the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates becomes immense. Markets are pricing in, like a 99.9% chance of a rate cut soon? That helps lower the immediate borrowing costs for the government.
Okay, Fed cuts rates. What else?
The U.S. Treasury needs to adjust how it borrows. Instead of locking in current high rates with long-term bonds, like 10 or 30 years, they'll likely shift issuance towards very short-term Treasury bills, Think 1 month to maybe 12 months.
Kicking the can down the road on interest costs, basically.
Sort of. It manages the immediate cash flow pain, but it also means constantly refinancing debt at whatever the prevailing short-term rates are. But the bigger point is why these actions are necessary.
Because the underlying fiscal situation demands them.
Precisely. These aren't just optional policy tweaks. They are necessary maneuvers to prevent the system from seizing up under the weight of the debt service. And that means currency debasement isn't just a risk, it's practically baked into the cake.
Which, circling back, only reinforces why global actors are nervous about holding dollars or dollar debt long term.
Absolutely. When international creditors see that a country's domestic fiscal mess is forcing the hand of its central bank, trust erodes. It confirms the risk. It fuels the diversification away from the dollar that we talked about earlier. It significantly heightens that local dollar liquidity risk for anyone holding dollar debt globally.
So let's synthesize this. We have this powerful dual force at play.
Yeah, it's like a pincer movement on the dollar.
Yeah.
You've got the trade conflicts and geopolitics pushing global users away externally, and at the same time, you have this unsustainable domestic fiscal path basically forcing the U.S. towards dollar debasement internally.
And the interconnected result
Is a systematically strengthening RMB, gaining ground from these shifts, and significantly increased risks for anyone reliant on dollar funding globally. That debasement trade, as they call it, it looks like it still has legs.
That's a really powerful conclusion. It brings together the external and internal factors quite clearly. So what's your take on this for you listening? What's the next step in thinking about this?
Well, given everything we've discussed, that the debasement pressure seems baked in, and U.S. spending isn't likely coming down meaningfully anytime soon, especially with ongoing economic competition.
How might you see the dollar's declining leverage, its, well, weakening position, start to impact things closer to home, maybe your own investment choices, or perhaps volatility in the prices of everyday consumer goods? That's something to really mull over. Share your point of view in the comments below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Geo9 so you don't miss future insights.